The 1974 Mel Brooks film Blazing Saddles is a dark comedy with a satirical take on the Western genre that brings up serious issues when it comes to violence, politics, and racism. Almost every scene in this film is more ridiculous and offensive than the last. Every joke and gag had me laughing, but it didn't feel right. But why? Why was I so uncomfortable? The only explanation is that, despite the film's jovial tone, it depicted racism in a comedic light in a way that so rarely occurs in media today. It has a lighter tone that doesn't treat racism as something serious, but rather as something ridiculous. My original reaction to this film was that it flew too close to the sun and used racism insensitively as a springboard for comedy, but only later did I realize that this was intentional. Blazing Saddles did fly too close to the sun, but not because it was trying to point out how funny racism can be, but instead, via satire, point out how fundamentally ridiculous the idea of racism actually is. In this video, we will examine how Blazing Saddles addresses racism and ultimately succeeds in showing the audience that racism isn't just evil, but it's also extremely stupid. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines satire as, quote, a literary work holding up human vices and follies to ridicule or scorn them, as well as wit, irony, or sarcasm used to expose and discredit vice or folly. So with that definition in mind, let's analyze Bart's arrival at Rock Ridge. This scene is a prime example of characterizing racism as serious while also pointing out how stupid the concept truly is. The residents are so offended by Bart's appearance that they all silently respond by pointing their guns at him. The only person who breaks the silence is a Reverend Johnson. Let's see if this man of God and the moral anchor of the community can talk some sense into his congregation.
As your spiritual leader, I implore you to pay heed to this good book and what it has to say.
His Bible is shot by a racist citizen, and the Reverend leaves once he sees that his flock won't be so easily persuaded to change their ways. Personally, as a Christian, this made me laugh, but it also made me uncomfortable because with Christianity at the core of many traditional American values, slavery and racism still occurred, and most slave owners in America very likely identified as Christian.
Hold it. The next man makes a move, the nigger gets it.
Listen to him, man. He's just crazy enough to do it.
Drop it, or I swear I'll blow this nigger's head all over this town. Oh, Lordy Lord, he's desperate. Do what he say. Do what he say.
Bart takes himself hostage, talking as both the hostage taker and the hostage. Notice how the hostage taker has a gruff, deep voice, a semi-known stereotype of African American men, while the hysterical hostage persona says the phrase, do what he say, referencing the stereotype that African Americans use poor grammar. This depiction also made me uncomfortable because Bart needed to perform this quasi-suicidal ploy just to save his own life.
You are so talented, and they are so dumb.
An initial reading of this scene would indicate that he is simply insulting their intellect, but looking at this scene via satire shows something deeper. It depicts him not only insulting their intelligence, but also their racism. He played to their racist expectations by performing in a way they believe something a man of his skin color would actually do. Once he was alone, he looks at the camera and comments to the audience how stupid people are to believe such stereotypes. This applies to both the scene we just witnessed and, because of this breaking the fourth wall moment, the real world as well. It's an uncomfortable scene to watch because it drags racism into the spotlight, not to blame anyone or make people feel guilty, but to address this taboo in a way that displays how stupid it truly is. Let's see what the actor-director Ricky Gervais says about covering such taboo topics in a comedic light.
And that's why I deal in taboo subjects as well, because I think I want to take them to a place they haven't been before.
Exactly.
Because I think comedy is surprise. And
yeah, okay.
And I do feel, when I start on a contentious subject, I feel the tension. Like, oh, is this going to be all right? Are we being allowed to laugh?
Yeah.
And I take them through a scary forest and out the other side, and it's always okay. And they, phew, right? And I think that's the important thing, because I've often said that people get offended when they mistake the subject of a joke with the actual target.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily the same thing. You can make jokes about any subject. It depends what the joke is.
Yeah.
There's no rules. You can't joke about this. You can.
You should be
You
able
just
to.
can.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's nothing sacred.
Well, that's the
really.
point. There's nothing sacred. So
Yeah.
everything should be subject to ridicule.
Yeah.
I mean, even just to force you to understand, think about it more.
I know. But people then they go, wow, yeah, but you shouldn't hurt people's feelings. Well, you can if their feelings are wrong.
Many films about racism have been made since Blazing Saddles, but few of them have portrayed this issue with the same comedic tone. I believe that films like Blazing Saddles are not as common today because both film and society have progressed in the past 47 years since its release. We have moved to addressing racism at a historic and systemic level, rather than pointing out how ridiculous the premise is. Modern-day movie companies are very hesitant to produce films that address racism with satire or comedy because it risks offending their audiences. With the constant threat of audience backlash, most studios are very unlikely to release a film treating racism as anything other than the very serious issue it used to be and still is today. To end this presentation, I want to play a scene from an interview with Blazing Saddles director Mel Brooks, who is asked about whether or not Blazing Saddles is a film that he thinks could be made today.
I don't know. I don't think so, because I went too far with the use of the N-word, with cowboys sitting around a camp farting. And a lot of people, you can't blame them for saying, never should be made. Terrible. But that's what I do. I make the things that nobody else would make.
What does that tell you about the state of comedy today?
Well, for me, they're a little too strict about, what's in bad taste and what's in good taste. And I think MF, the MF word, it's purposeful. It has grit. You can't shower people with truth and grit if you're going to be careful about stepping out of the lines. You got to step outside the lines. And I think that the political correctness is too, I'm sorry to say it, is too politically correct.
Racism is undoubtedly a very serious issue and should be treated as such. Nonetheless, I believe that Blazing Saddles is a shining example that comedy can be a viable way to address the evils of racism and how absurd it truly is.